ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, I would like to talk about Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls, it's got the finale coming up, to date this video right off the bat, but anyway, a finale is coming up, and we did a spoof on Gravity Falls, based on just some of the stuff that I've observed from the show. It's a very short spoof. It's kind of about Bill and Mabel and Dipper and whatnot. So I thought that I would talk about the show because, like many of the things that I parody, I actually enjoy the show quite a bit. Gravity Falls is a very clever show about a couple of kids living in Oregon, I think it is, with their great uncle Stan. The show's got kind of an interesting premise and setup. The whole thing has to do with exploring the mysteries of this town that they live in called Gravity Falls. The stars of the show are these two kids called Mabel and Dipper, who are twins, and they're based, I think, somewhat on Alex Hirsch and his sister, because apparently he was a twin, or at least he had a sister, and they were very close. They did all those things that twins do, you know, like holding hands, speaking simultaneously, scaring kids in hotels, all the stuff that twins do. I used to have twin friends, and that was a very common thing. But anyway, though, the show's run for about 2 seasons, and then it's ending, which is not a common thing that you see anymore. I mean, like, if you look at Nickelodeon, they've been running Fairly Odd Parents for years now. I'm not sure how long they've been running SpongeBob. I mean, has it been at least, like, a decade or something like that? It's kind of ridiculous. And we're looking at, like, My Little Pony. My Little Pony's going to go on for about 6, maybe even 7 years, which is completely unheard of for a kid show. We were talking about this, actually, is like, when My Little Pony, I think, was in its 2nd season, like, my friend's daughter was 5, and you know, you go on for, like, 5 or 6 years, and she'll be, like, 10, you know, some of the kids that were watching it when they were 7, they can be, like, preteens, you know, they're thinking about boys and stuff like that, and you've got these My Little Ponies that are still supposedly appealing to them as a demographic, or trying to. Just doesn't really happen. Fairly Odd Parents is the weirdest one. I like to think, like, they did crossovers in that with, like, Jimmy Neutron, and then Jimmy Neutron went off the air, and so I gotta think, like, Timmy Turner was friends with Jimmy Neutron. Is he aware that Jimmy's universe is dead? I mean, like, does he know? Like, does he feel bad? Would he be like, oh man, Jimmy, like, oh, you're out of work, bud. Do you want to stay at my place for a while? But anyway, though, yeah, the show is interesting because the premise is that Dipper and Mabel have parents, I guess, and their parents turn to each other and they say, hey, you know what family member we haven't seen in, like, decades, and who we probably have no fondness for whatsoever? Our Uncle Stan, the great Uncle Stan, this guy that, like, lives out in the woods in a mystery shack, that sells, like, knickknacks and jackalopes and other crazy stuff. You know, it'd be like a really eye-opening experience for our kids if we shipped them off to Oregon and made them live with this guy throughout the summer, and then just, I don't know, pick them up and see how they feel. Like, that'd be great for the kids. So this is what they do, is the parents just come and they just drop off Dipper and Mabel, these pair of young twins. I think they're like 12? I believe? Yeah, because they're talking about going to middle school. So they're like 12. They're like 12-year-olds. They just drop them off with this guy, this Great Uncle Stan guy. And at first it makes sense, because you assume that, like, they kept in touch with Uncle Stan, with Great Uncle Stan. But as the series goes on, it becomes apparent that, honestly, nobody has actually seen or talked to Great Uncle Stan for, like, decades. There's no way that they could have, because they have some little twists in there that really rely on the fact that Great Uncle Stan hasn't been seen in, like, decades. Not to give too much away, I don't want to give away spoilers. But basically, yeah, there's no way that they could have seen Great Uncle Stan anytime within the last, like, 40 years or something like that. I don't know, 20 to 40 years. So Great Uncle Stan, though, he's out in the woods, he's running this little thing called the Mystery Shack, and the Mystery Shack is like, it's like a Ripley's Believe It or Not store, except for trashier, if you will. And he just makes a living by swindling people and trying to convince them that there's all kind of mysterious things going on. But Dipper and Mabel, the main characters of the show, they go out and they find this journal, which talks about all kinds of actual mysterious things that exist in Gravity Falls. And as it turns out, there's actually a lot of horrible things in Gravity Falls. There's gnomes and sea monsters and mermen. The merman's actually kind of funny. I really like this merman character. His name is Mermando, and he falls in love with Mabel. And he lives in a swimming pool, like a chlorinated swimming pool. And so they have a whole episode where they get Mermando out to the lake, because the lake is better than the swimming pool. The lake is quite a bit larger, you see. So, yes, there's lots of fun stuff. And for the most part, it's very kid-friendly. But they've got a few things that are a little bit leaning more towards the creepy side, and they include a lot of mysteries in every single episode. One clever thing that I like that they've done is at the end of every episode, and I believe that during the intro song as well, they have a voice that speaks backwards. and there's like ciphers and codes and things like that. And so fans who are really dedicated kind of go online and they collaborate and they try to break the codes and figure out what stuff is being hinted at. There's a bunch of different ciphers. Many of them being used are actually real ciphers, so you can go online and do research and figure out like, oh, this is referring to this cipher, so this is the cipher we use to crack the code. And then they also have a Bill cipher, and Bill cipher is both a character and the cipher that gets used to hide information in the show. Bill Cipher is kind of neat. We actually used him in the parody, but Bill Cipher is neat because he's this little triangle guy and just a top hat, and he's incredibly two-dimensional, which means he's super easy to draw, which means that fans of the show have had a really easy time drawing Bill fan art. And he's like a interdimensional being. He's a bad guy of sorts, but the show never really elaborates on what exactly his main goals are. In my opinion, as the show goes along, you get a little bit of Lovecraft influence. I mean, you could argue now, at this point, Lovecraft is actually kind of enough of a cultural staple that you could argue that, it's not really fair to say that things are Lovecraftian necessarily, because, like, trans-dimensional beings and whatnot, it's sort of a cultural deal. But Lovecraft is relevant because I feel like whenever Lovecraft got too detailed with his monsters, or when he did things that were just too blatant, too in your face, it sort of ruined some of the mystery and some of the intrigue of the monsters that he was writing about, which was just terrible. And with Bill, you get a little bit of this towards the end when Bill's big plan is finally revealed. Throughout the show, like every time Bill shows up, it's kind of mysterious what exactly it is that Bill wants. But he can get into your dreams. He can do a bit of magic. If you make a deal with him, then he can manipulate things through your body. Stuff like that, and he wants to get into the real world. This is kind of his thing. And then when he gets there, basically, his whole plan is just to throw a party. And I found this incredibly disappointing. Like this is your big bad, right? This is your big finale villain that's gonna come forward and he's gonna do something terrible. And it turns out the terrible thing that he wants to do is just throw a party. I mean, there's not really any kind of world domination scheme or politics or anything really convoluted or clever. Or not anything very intelligent. It's just you have all this scheming and conniving and hundreds. He's got centuries. He's been at this for centuries trying to open up this portal. Centuries and centuries and centuries. And he finally gets in the world, and his whole plan is just to throw a destructive party. He just wants to break things. And I guess the best way that I could explain Bill as a villain is that he's like that kid with a magnifying glass just burning ants, and the people and human beings are ants, and they just look up and they don't understand the magnifying glass, but Bill just finds it hilarious to incinerate everybody. So I suppose that's the character, and you could argue whether or not that's a good motivation, but I don't know. I spent the whole thing kind of being oh, Bill's kind of neat. I wonder what Bill's actually going for. I wonder what Bill really wants. And then they told me, and I was like, oh. Well, that's not nearly as cool as I thought it might have been. You have that element, that letdown, where the imagination is really much better than the reality. Had Bill maybe never succeeded in getting into the real world, I might have been happier. But anyway, that's what our little spoof was about. That's the gist of it. But aside from that, though, Bill is probably the only thing, that whole deal is really the only thing that I kind of dislike about the show. And as a dislike, it's not even really a really strong dislike. It's just sort of a mechanical, if you're going to be writing, how do you write a convincingly horrible trans-dimensional being that theoretically nobody should be able to understand? You can't understand his full intentions. So how would you write this character? But everything else is pretty clever and pretty fun. It's mostly a comedy show. There was one other writing thing that really bugged me, and this was this episode where they had a shapeshifter, and Wendy comes along, and she has to establish for the audience that she's carrying a hatchet. And I think the writers at some point realized, I mean, in this sort of thing, normally I think you would use cartoon logic, Wendy would just have a hatchet, but at the scene when the hatchet was important, it would have seemed like a kind of an ass pull if she just pulled out a hatchet and just had a hatchet. The audience would have been oh, where'd the hatchet come from? So at the start of the episode, they have to establish that Wendy has a hatchet, and then they kind of inconsistently drew the hatchet. So there would be times when she'd just be walking around and there would be no hatchet anywhere on her. I mean, a hatchet is a big bulky item. You can't just sort of try to tune that up. But they would use cartoon logic and they'd just be she has the hatchet. She pulls it out from her back and hatchet. But the establishing scene that they did for that is something got stuck up high. I can't remember what it was. And so the two kids start to argue, and then like wordlessly, Wendy just goes up, she climbs the tree, and then she uses the hatchet to do something. I think she was trying to reach a lever. So she uses the hatchet, and then she goes, "Oh yeah, you know, like my dad was a lumberjack, right? You know, this is..." And that's fair. Like theoretically, it would make sense for her to know how to do lumberjack stuff, like climb trees. But the more I thought about it, because they brought attention to the fact that she had this hatchet, I started thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't make sense for Wendy to just carry a hatchet around in the woods. I mean, like, yeah, her dad, sure. But that's because her dad, like, works in the woodcutting industry. So maybe her dad would carry a hatchet around on a regular basis. Maybe he takes a lot of pride in his job. But, like, Wendy works as a cashier. So this character Wendy, like, she's just walking around with a hatchet just for this one day, this one particular episode. Or is she always carrying the hatchet? I mean, like, when she's at work, does she have the hatchet and they just don't draw it? Like, if in future episodes, if she pulls the hatchet out from behind her back, is that cool? I don't know. I just started thinking about this. It's like, so what kind of woman is Wendy that she just walks around town with this hatchet on her belt? Or what was she going to do that made her think that she needed a hatchet that one particular day? So that was just like really weird for me, and the hatchet kept coming and going, and it just really bugged me, that freaking hatchet. I don't know. Like, aside from that, the episode wasn't written poorly at all. I just kept thinking about that hatchet afterward, though. The meaning of the hatchet, yeah. Yeah, but anyway, though. The other main characters, though, you got Wendy, who's basically this redhead girl that the character Dipper sort of falls in love with for a little while. But she kind of has to break it to him that she's like a fully grown teenager. Well, I don't know, fully grown. She might be like 16, whatever. She's reaching her later teens, and like Dipper is still a young kid. So she kind of breaks it to him. She goes, "Dipper, like I'm in like my teens, and you're like 12, and I don't think that this is gonna pan out." And so Dipper kind of copes with this, and you have a couple of episodes where Dipper sort of gets it together and decides to move on, which is sort of nice. I suppose you don't really see a lot of episodes where you have like a 12-year-old boy falling for a much older girl. Yeah, point is, Wendy is a character. Wendy is a redheaded character. She doesn't do a whole lot except for occasionally she sets the plot in motion. One time she has a hatchet. She's a friend. She helps out. She's useful, but not a real core sort of part of the group. A stronger member of the show is Soos, and Soos is actually one of my favorite characters. Soos is like this fat guy who also hangs out. He sort of cleans up the store, manages inventory, does all the heavy lifting. I think he restocks the vending machine, stuff like that. Soos, great big fat guy. His dad left him years ago, and he's kind of disappointed about it. He imagines his dad as a Mexican wrestler, which I have to admit is like one of the best things ever. I mean, if I were Soos, I also too would like to imagine that my dad was El Santo or someone else. But I guess he comes from a Spanish family. I would guess Mexican, but who knows? Actually, he doesn't really go into it. He refers to his grandmother, I think, as like I can't remember the pet name, but it's definitely a Spanish pet name. But he lives with his mom still. And he's got a couple of interesting episodes. I think my favorite, and one that I still see GIFs posted up online, is the Giffany arc, or arc rather, the Giffany episode. And this is an episode where Soos buys this video game, and it's a dating sim. And he gets this thing because he wants to talk to women, and he's hoping that the dating sim will help practice, and he can like learn how to talk to women a little bit better. So he plays this thing for a little while, and then it turns out, of course, it's alive and it's self-aware, and it falls in love with Soos, and Soos actually meets a real woman, and they're both a little bit nerdy, like she's kind of nerdy, and he goes, "Oh, okay, well, we should date," and so he just quits playing the dating sim because, like, you know, he's met a real woman, he doesn't want to play the dating sim anymore. So the dating sim gets upset and tries to either murder him or murder his date. I think both eventually, and it's pretty funny. It takes like a lot of the anime kawaii stuff, those tropes, and then sort of turns them into a horrible villain character. But Soos is such a big lovable guy, it kind of plays really well with him. It was good comedy, it was good fun. Soos. Then let's see, what else have we got? We've got our villains. We've got the villain Pacifica. Pacifica's a rich girl, and it's pretty much your standard rich girl thing, you know. She's like, "Oh, I'm rich, therefore I look down on everybody. Therefore I am the bad guy." They do a little bit of a reversal later on. You know, it's the typical bad guy, the typical rich girl redemption thing. Like, her parents continue to be rich, and her parents continue to look down on people, but she has an episode where she works together with the main characters, and it turns out that, oh, you know, people aren't necessarily bad just because they're rich. Some of them are young enough to be changed into normal people later, and you know, the weird thing about wealth being a source of evil is that it's a really complicated subject, but in a show, you really can't, like, if you spend a lot of time trying to establish exactly the nature of the evil of money, like, you wouldn't really get much else done. Like, you'd sit there and you'd be like, oh, well, I'm evil. You know, typically it's just like, well, I'm evil because I look down on people. But the reality is, it's like, well, I'm evil because I have a ton of influence and I won't let anything happen unless I get the upper hand on this deal. And you know, it's much more like money is the root of all evil, because it creates leverage and people use the leverage, and like, leverage by itself is not really evil. It's like there's all these long-term cascading effects that make it kind of terrible. So anyway, yes, her parents are just evil. They're snobs, and that makes them bad. So Pacifica turns out that, oh, well, maybe I could not be a snob. And who knows, you know, she'll go on and maybe she'll lobby the government, but she won't be a snob about it. She'll be a nice person. So, yeah. So that's a villain. The next biggest villain that they have, probably aside from Bill, recurring villain, is this little kid named Gideon. And I really like Gideon. Gideon is sort of like a televangelist. He's got like big hair, but he's a little kid. He's a little 12-year-old kid with like great big hair, but he's like super cute. And he's always talking about like his special powers, his magic powers, and things like that. And so he's basically like a faith healer. This is what they're making fun of. He never actually does any faith healings, but he's a scam artist, and he just gets up there and, using his charm and his wits, he convinces everybody that he's so great. And so everybody in town worships him, and he uses this. This is actually, Gideon is probably closer to the real problem with rich people than anything, is that Gideon actually just uses all the leverage that he creates in town to make life hell for people that he doesn't like, Dipper particularly. But he also winds up taking a fancy towards Mabel. He decides that he wants to hook up with Mabel, so this winds up being, aside from Romando, the closest thing that Mabel gets to a exciting dating thing. On numerous occasions, Gideon goes out and captures Mabel, and then Mabel becomes like a damsel in distress of sorts, and just tries to persuade her to marry him, or if not Mabel, then Dipper, because Gideon is trying to kill Dipper so that he thinks that Dipper is the reason why Mabel won't hook up with him. So he wants to either kill Dipper or capture Mabel, and you go back and forth, and in all of his episodes, he's basically working between these two deal. Kill the Pines family, hook up with Mabel. Those are his goals. Those are his life goals. But yeah, kind of an amusing little kid. His dad is like a, I don't know, they're very country bumpkin sort of thing, you know, like they speak with an accent, you know, it's kind of like it's a strong Tennessee accent, you know, Tennessee, they've got that, I say it's the very southern televangelist sort of deal. I don't know if people really speak like that out in Oregon. I don't think that they do. I don't believe that that's a common accent, even in the backwoods of like Oregon. I know Washington. I know people who live in the backwoods of Washington for sure, and they don't have that accent. So I don't think that is that way in Oregon. So I don't know. Maybe Gideon, he picked up and he moved from Tennessee all the way out to Oregon to really set down his roots and where all the trees are. Or maybe there's too much competition where he lived. I don't know, they don't really go very much into his past. It'd be kind of neat if they did. There's a bunch of other characters, though. There's lots of people who I don't really necessarily remember their names, but they're very memorable throughout the show. I mean, like, they're just kind of weird. Like, there's this one like skinny guy who is just always, he just stands on the sidelines always, and he just goes, yeah, get him. And he appears like over and over again, and he becomes like I don't know, he's not really a character so much as like a joke. Like, he's a reoccurring joke that appears over and over again, and eventually you just become endeared to this guy. There's also these couple of cops, and the cops are almost certainly gay. They don't come outright and say it, but they talk like a couple, like, and they're like, and like, the short black cop is like super sensitive to like this. There's this tall white cop, and they're like super sensitive towards each other, and they just talk about like, oh man, I don't like that thing, and the other guy's like, oh, that's okay, like you don't have to like thing, and you know. So they're like super weird. They never investigate anything. They never really do anything. Whenever somebody's doing something weird, they quickly lose interest in actually enforcing the law. Yes. But anyway, though, there's not really much of a strong continuing arc. You can kind of jump in and watch any episode, one piece at a time. There's continuity, certainly. Bill being a reoccurring character is an important thing. Gideon being a reoccurring villain is an important thing. One thing that they did is at the end of the first season, a lot of the villains that they had seen previously came back. So there's a certain amount of continuity, but it's not so crucial that you couldn't just jump in anywhere and enjoy the show. So I mean, like, you could just watch an episode, and like one episode is pretty well representative of the other episodes. I don't personally think that any episode really fell short. Anyway, I kind of enjoy the whole Gravity Falls. Like I say, the only thing that ever threw me was that hatchet. And I remember talking to Kenza about it. I was like, where did she get the hat? Why did she carry around the hatchet? And she was like, Greg, stop. And I was like, no, this is important. You can't do that. You have to explain why, like, be like, I'm on my way to a hatchet contest or something. Like, some reason, you gotta explain why you have this hatchet now. You can't just turn around and be like, my dad's a lumberjack. No, because you don't carry the hatchet around normally. Like, you gotta explain. You gotta explain. Yeah. So anyway, though, yes. Gravity Falls. If you haven't seen Gravity Falls, I recommend checking it out. It's coming to an end. So I mean, like, after today, you should theoretically, from totally legitimate sources, you can probably watch the whole thing. It'll be available somewhere, wherever it is that those things become available, and you can check out the whole show. If you haven't already, I recommend you give it a shot. So anyway, I suppose that's it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.